I'd now like to return to the ritual of the 33rd degree Mason as quoted in E. the Star Miller's book entitled The Occult Theocracy. The ritual continues with its explanations of just what it is that has killed mankind. Religion, because religion is but philosophies evolved by men of genius and adopted by the people in the belief that they would increase their well-being. So here we see that the Masons are out to attack religion as one of the killers of mankind. What they are saying is that, in their opinion, we are being lied to by religion because they are telling us that their view of the world would make men happy. If only we understood that religion is a giant fraud, we would reject organized religion and accept the Masonic religion. It would be a paradise on earth. And this is what these Masons are teaching us. Let's continue now with the 33rd degree ritual. Neither law, property, nor religion can be imposed on man as they annihilate him by depriving him of this most precious right. They are assassins on whom we have sworn to wreak vengeance. Notice, they, law, religion, and property, are assassins on whom we, 33rd degree Masons, have sworn to wreak vengeance. They are enemies against whom we have declared war to the death and without quarter. So here we see that the Masons take an oath to destroy law, property, and religion. Notice, we wonder why judges in America will not listen to the patriots in their courts who stand up for their God-given rights to private property. As I said before, I can't prove this, but I suspect that it is simply because the majority of judges in America are members of the Masonic Lodge. And many of these Masons, many of these judges have taken an oath to avenge the death, the murder of Hiram, law, property, and religion. The murderers of Hiram. Let's continue with the 33rd degree Masonic ceremony. Of these three infamous enemies, it is on religion that we must concentrate our most deadly attacks, because no people have ever survived its religion. Once religion is dead, law and property will fall to our mercy, and we shall be able to regenerate society, meaning regenerate it into the New World Order, by founding on the corpses of the assassins of man, Masonic religion, Masonic law, and Masonic property. So here we can see that the new society, called the New World Order, is based upon Masonic principles of no property, no law, and no religion. And I want you to know that Albert Pike and the other Masons believe that this New World Order is something to be desired. He wrote, if men were all Masons, that world would be a paradise. The reason that I believe that this account by E. the Star Miller of the 33rd degree Masonic ritual is accurate is because it has been confirmed by a key Masonic writer in his book that was approved by the 33rd degree Council of Masonic Lodge. I'd like to return once again to Rex Hutchins, the 33rd degree Mason I quoted before. Rex Hutchins is the author of this book entitled A Bridge to Light. We've looked at it before. This book, as I said, has been published by the 33rd degree Council of the Masonic Lodge. Therefore, we can know that this is the official teaching of the Masonic Lodge. There is no question that this is the official position of the worldwide Masons. But before I quote from Mr. Hutchins' book, I would like to recall a little background from comments made previously during this lecture. Remember that Hiram Abiff built Solomon's Temple, and that the Masons teach that he was attacked by 3 apprentice Masons because he would not reveal the secrets of the Master Mason to them. Mr. Hutchins wrote, what are the symbolic attacks upon Hiram? Notice that Mr. Hutchins admits that the attacks are symbolic and not real. Hiram is first accosted at the south gate of the temple, where the instrument of the attack is the rule. In Greek, the word for a rule, whether a measuring instrument or a code of conduct, is canon. Thus, we see the bureaucracy of the early church. Presumably, Mr. Hutchins is referring to the Catholic Church, establishing the canon law to regulate conduct. He said this law was to be obeyed with unquestioned loyalty. Hence, it is an apt symbol of the suppression of freedom of speech, which might question the divinity and justice of these laws. Albert Pike confirms what Mr. Hutchins just said in his book entitled Agenda on page 17 of his book. Albert Pike wrote, "The rule is a rule of conduct. The rule, therefore canon, is an apt symbol of the church. It is a symbol of the pontifical and sacerdotal power." The word sacerdotal means a belief in the divine authority of the priesthood. The Catholics teach that their priests are the intermediaries between man and God, and that the chief priest, the Pope, is infallible on matters of church theology. Mr. Hutchins continues, "The rigid, unbending square of steel is an apt symbol of the imperial power of Rome," meaning Rome, the home of the Catholic Church. I want to stop here and make an observation. Notice that Mr. Hutchins is critical of the Catholic Church because they say that all the Catholics must obey their teachings with unquestioned loyalty. The one thing I know about the Catholic Church is that if any Catholic does not like what the Church teaches, they are free to leave. No one in the Catholic Church, Catholic religion, requires that you obey with unquestioned loyalty. Any Catholic is free to leave if they disagree with what the Church teaches. Mr. Hutchins is a hypocrite. It is interesting to note that nowhere that I can find in his book does he criticize the federal government when they definitely require, that all Americans, quote, obey with unquestioned loyalty, unquote, any of their laws that any American does not agree with. If you do not like a particular American law, one that violates your rights to life, liberty, or property, you cannot disagree with the law and leave. The government passes laws, and we must obey them with unquestioned loyalty. We cannot leave if we disagree. For instance, I believe, as I pointed out in the last session of this lecture, that welfare is legalized theft. I believe that government has no right to take my property in the form of taxation to give it to someone that they claim needs it. This is called stealing if I do not believe in welfare. If I object by not paying my taxes, I go to jail. That is requiring me to obey with unquestioned loyalty. But this learned PhD, Dr. Rex Hutchins, does not object to that. When one person is required to work for the benefit of another, it is called slavery. When the government forces one person to earn a wage for the benefit of another, it is called slavery. Slavery is defined as forcing one to work for the benefit of another. Welfare forces me to work for the benefit of another. Welfare is slavery, but Dr. Hutchins cannot see that. I used to be a Catholic. I did not like some of the things they were teaching, so I left. No one forced me to go to church. No one forced me to obey with unquestioned loyalty. But this PhD does not understand the difference. PhDs are supposed to be educated, but Mr. Hutchins cannot recognize slavery when he sees it, because when I am forced to pay my taxes when I object, it is called slavery. But this PhD cannot recognize that, and because that is pure hypocrisy. Yet Mr. Hutchins is critical of the Catholic Church, where anyone is free to leave if they do not wish to obey, but he is not critical of the government where none are free to leave if they do not wish to obey. Dr. Hutchins was not able to see the difference, yet Dr. Hutchins received his PhD from the University of Arizona. That means that he is an educated man. Supposedly, this PhD would be able to figure this out, but he can't. And this very glaring mistake was repeated by Albert Pike, who wrote this on page 15 of his book entitled Legenda. The Scottish Masonry makes no war on Catholicism, apparently meaning Christianity, as a religion. It resists only its claim of right to resort to force to compel men to believe what its infallibility decides to be truth in matters incomprehensible. So even the greatest Mason of all time cannot recognize slavery when he sees it. So Mr. Pike is just as wrong as Mr. Hutchins. Both of these men are learned hypocrites. That makes Masonry wrong in one of its basic premises. Because Hutchins and Pike cannot see slavery when it shows up in the form of legalized theft, Masonry cannot see slavery when it shows up in the form of legalized theft. Masonry, where is your objection to legalized theft in the form of welfare? Where is your objection when the government forces us to obey with unquestioned loyalty? I think any fair researcher will find no objection in their writings. So the Masons are hypocrites. The Masons who do not object to legalized theft are hypocrites. Masonry, where is your objection to slavery in the form of welfare? Welfare has been part of the government's program of legalized theft for some 30 years. But where is Masonry's objection? They object to an example where there is no force, but are silent where there is force. Let me recommend to any Mason watching this video, it is time to get out. Do not obey the Masons with unquestioned loyalty. It is time to get out. Leave the order. Mr. Hutchins continues in his book, therefore Hiram, with the rule, is struck where the organs of speech are. Here he points out that mankind was murdered by the church who would not let them question their teachings. They are murdered with the rule, meaning the teachings of the canon church, of the Catholic Church. Before I continue with Mr. Hutchins' quote, I would like to show you these two symbols of the Masons, the square and the compass. Notice that the two objects are the square, a right-angled piece of metal used for drawing straight lines, and it is one of the two symbols of the Masonic Lodge. The other is the compass, used for drawing circles and curved lines. Mr. Hutchins continues, the instrument of attack at the west gate of the temple was the square. It, meaning the square, represents the merger of civil and religious power intending to control man's emotions, telling him not only what he can do, but also what he can believe. Thus, Hiram is struck near the heart, the traditional seat of the affections. What he was saying here is that man was created with certain emotions. Mr. Hutchins is claiming that religion deprives him of his right to enjoy those emotions by teaching him what is right and wrong. One of those emotions is sexual desire. This emotion is God-given. But then, according to Mr. Hutchins, religion tells you not to exercise your emotion except under the marriage commitment, by teaching that you shouldn't enjoy this natural emotion anytime you so choose to enjoy it if you are not married. Even if you wish to enjoy your emotion by force, meaning that you shouldn't rape someone. What Mr. Hutchins is saying is that religion deprives mankind of the use of their God-given emotions by telling him that he can't use it. It is his claim that religion unfairly teaches man not to enjoy any woman he chooses to enjoy at any time and under any circumstance. Religion teaches that a man exercising one of his emotions can't be intimate with, for instance, his daughter. But what if he wants to be because his mind tells him it's okay? What if the Mason wants to enjoy one of his emotions with a 2-year-old baby? The Masons cannot tolerate religion interfering with man's emotions. So mankind was killed by religion. Mr. Hutchins continues, the setting maul, an instrument of brute force, is a fitting symbol of the blind, unreasoning mob. The setting maul is a hammer used by a stonemason in the cutting of a stone to the proper size. Masons use the hammer to drive the chisel in removing parts of the stone. It, meaning the unreasoning mob, fears the force of the intellect and seeks the destruction of the products of the mind. So here he repeats his charge. The religious people seek to destroy the product of the mind. The Masons teach that whatever man reasons is acceptable behavior is acceptable behavior. As we've seen, the Masons teach that man can't have religion telling him what he can or cannot do, what his mind tells him what he wants to do. Mr. Hutchins continues, Hiram is killed at the east gate by a blow to the head, the seat of the intellect. So here in the symbolic story about the murder of Hiram Abiff, religion kills mankind by a blow to the head where man's ability to reason is contained. The head is where man's brain is, where man is able to use his reason to decide for himself what he wants to do. Mr. Hutchins amplifies his thoughts about religion and government a little later in his book. He wrote this on page 287. The tiara and crown are the object of discourse. The crown represents all those kings and emperors who have usurped or abused power, reigned for themselves and not the people, and robbed the people of their liberty. Now, he is not talking about the liberty of the people in America, for instance. He's talking about the governments that have robbed the people of their liberty to make their own decisions about right and wrong. The people create government to protect their property, their life, and their liberty by exercising their God-given right to protect themselves. But here the good doctor says that governments deprive mankind of the ability to enjoy someone else's property or someone else's wife or someone else's liberty. Dr. Hutchins continues, the tiara is not a symbol of any particular religion or creed, but of the patron of ignorance and ally of despotism, which in every age has made dupes of men and enslaved humanity through fear and superstition. So religion has enslaved men through fear and superstition. Albert Pike agreed. He wrote this on page 19 of his book entitled Agenda. The crown itself is but a symbol, and royalty is but the most common type of tyranny. I want you to notice something. I am not making any of this up. These comments are coming directly from high-ranking Masonic sources. I hope that you are noticing that I have been carefully documenting my material directly from Masonic sources. If I was wrong in my comments, I could be sued by the Masons, but they are strangely silent, and I believe they know that I am right. Albert Pike is, as I said, another 33rd degree Mason, and he agreed with Rex Hutchins. In this book entitled Agenda, we've quoted before, but I've never shown you a slide of it, Pike wrote this, men are good. Evil institutions alone have made them bad. And it is the duty of Masonry and of every knight to aid in leading them back to the truth. The evil institutions that have made men bad are the government and the church. And we have seen that Masons take oaths to destroy the government and the church. And in summary, I'd like to show you that this statement was correct. Mr. Pike wrote this in his book called Legenda. As Masons, we deny the right of any church or pontiff or council to prescribe to men what they shall believe. Armed with the doctrines of Masonry, we war incessantly against these ancient enemies of the truth, against spiritual tyranny, intolerance, fanaticism, and superstition. This thought that Hiram was not a single man, but a symbol of all of mankind, is repeated on page 73 of Rex's book. This is what he wrote. The Master Hiram is the symbol of intelligence, liberty, and truth. And the assassins are the symbols of tyranny, ignorance, and intolerance and fanaticism. So the Masons believe that after they destroy religion, they'll be free to make their own decisions about everything. This position was clarified by Mr. Street in his book on Masonry. Hence, Masons everywhere are devoted to the doctrines of freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom of action. So we can see that the Masons believe in the lie of Lucifer, that they shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. All they have to do is destroy religion. And if author John Robinson is right, we can know exactly where it is in their initiation ceremonies that the Masons take an oath to destroy religion. This is John Robinson's book entitled A Pilgrim's Path. I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Robinson in Florida, Tampa, Florida, during a televised debate between the two of us, as we took the opposite sides on the issue of Freemasonry. Mr. Robinson also wrote this book, his first book, entitled Born in Blood, and was touring the country talking about it. The Masons do not know how or when they were formed, so Mr. Robinson attempted to prove that their order was connected to the Knights Templar back to 1307. The Masons liked his book, so he was touring the country speaking primarily to Masonic lodges when the television program in Tampa called me to debate him. I agreed to do so, and we went on the air. Mr. Robinson privately admitted to me that he was not a member of the Masonic Lodge, but apparently felt that their claims were of merit. He promised me that he would read my book entitled The New World Order, and I know that he did because he mentions that he read it in his second book. But it is quite apparent that he did not believe my documentation from the Masonic sources, so he wrote his second book to answer all of us critics with what he considered to be the truth of the Masonic Lodge. In that book, on pages 102 and 107, he tells the reader a great deal about the 30th degree initiation ceremony. This is what he says, and remember as we read this, what both Albert Pike and Rex Hutchins told us in their books, that the Masons are out to destroy religion, property, and law. Mr. Robinson tells us, in the southern jurisdiction 30th degree, the candidate is led into a tomb and 3 skulls on display. The skull on the left wears a crown, the one in the center bears a laurel wreath, and the third wears a papal tiara. The skull bearing the wreath of the hero is Jacques de Molay. We'll talk about him later. The skull with the crown represents Philip IV, a secular tyrant, while the third represents Clement V, a religious tyrant. The candidate is then told that he should always oppose tyranny in whatever form, whether it emanates from a government or from a religion. At another point in the 30th degree, the candidate recites an oath that includes the vow to strive unceasingly for the happiness of fellow beings, for the propagation of light. And here Mr. Robinson interprets light to mean knowledge, and for the overthrow of superstition, fanaticism, imposture, and intolerance. We have seen that the Masons consider tyranny to be the moral absolutes of God. So even Mr. Robinson was not able to see the truth that when the Masons say they are opposed to tyranny, they are opposed to the moral absolutes of God. They conceal their truths from people like Mr. Robinson so that he believes the words and does not look past the words to their concealed meaning, as Mr. Pike said he must to understand the coded words. So it is at the 30th degree that the Mason takes an oath to destroy religion. The Masons intentionally conceal that truth so that Mr. Robinson and the observer like Mr. Robinson thinks he is taking an oath to resist the tyranny of such people as Adolf Hitler and Saddam Hussein. But in truth, he is taking an oath to destroy Christianity. The fact that he was not able to see that in the words he mouthed during the oath is not the fault of the Masons. They told him that he would have to read between the lines to figure out the coded and concealed language. They told the Mason, but they know that most of them won't be able to figure it out. And apparently, Mr. Robinson was not able to see through the veil. Now let me return to my discussion of the Masonic ritual. We will see another connection between the Masons and the head of mankind a little later. But the Masons are not the only ones to state that law, property, and religion killed mankind. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky wrote in her book entitled The Secret Doctrine, the Elohim, meaning the triune God of the Bible, also feared the knowledge of good and evil for Adam, and therefore are shown as expelling him from Eden and killing him spiritually. This is almost the same thought presented by the Masons. So what we have been examining is that the Masons, the New Agers, and others are out to simply destroy law, religion, and property. And it is important to this exposition to show you that these are the same goals of the communists. As I said, Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism, wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848. This book called for the abolition of at least the family, all civilization, all religion. Marx wanted to abolish private property and nationalism. This is what Mr. Marx said about the family. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. The claptrap about the family, about the hallowed correlation of the parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting. This is what Karl Marx wrote about the need to abolish religion. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of man is a demand for their real happiness. We must war against all prevailing ideas of religion, of the state, of country, of patriotism. The idea of God is the keynote of perverted civilization. It must be destroyed. What? The idea of God as the keystone of perverted civilization. And this is what he wrote about the need to change the existing order of things. The communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. If you overthrow all existing social conditions, you must replace them with some new social conditions, and these new social conditions are called the New World Order. There are some other well-known individuals with connections between communism and Masonry. One of these is Daniel Ortega, the recent head of the Nicaraguan government. He gave an interview to Playboy magazine in which he made these revealing statements. The man who headed the Augusto Sandino Masonic Lodge would give us lectures about politics. That place played an important role in my political development. Daniel Ortega was a communist, and he admits that the head of one of the Masonic lodges taught him communism. And the reason that he taught him that was that Augusto Sandino, the man that the Masonic Lodge was named after, was a communist. He was the founder of the Sandinista communist movement in Nicaragua. And Augusto Sandino was also a Mason. That is why they named a lodge after him in Nicaragua. But we don't have to worry about this example of another connection between communism and Masonry. Playboy magazine doesn't believe there is a connection between Masonry and communism. The Playboy interviewer said, "It's hard to believe that a Masonic lodge was a hotbed of revolution." So they don't believe it. And this is the problem in the media all over the world. They simply will not believe the evidence, even after they hear it themselves from a communist like Ortega. The abolition of all social conditions is also the goal of the Illuminati. These are the goals of the Masons, and these are the goals of the communists. Other communists spoke out against the ordered ideas of Christianity. This is Nikolai Lenin, the so-called father of Russian communists. He wrote these thoughts in many of his writings. Atheism is an integral part of Marxism. Marxism is materialism. We must combat religion. We, of course, say that we do not believe in God. We do not believe in eternal morality. That is moral. That serves the destruction of the old society. So Lenin also said that religion must be destroyed before they create the new society called the New World Order. Lenin continued, everything is moral, which is necessary for the annihilation of the old exploiting social order. Religion is a kind of spiritual intoxicant in which the slaves of capital drown their humanity and blunt their desire for human experience. We, meaning we communists, shall also preach a scientific philosophy. We must fight against the inconsistencies of the Christians. So as we are starting to see, the New World Order is based on the desires of the communists. I shall continue that thought during the next session. The thoughts of Nikolai Lenin on destroying the old civilization are nearly the identical thoughts of Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati. It must be remembered that Adam Weishaupt was also a member of the Masonic Lodge. This is what Professor Weishaupt wrote. Liberty and equality are the essential rights that man in his original and primitive perfection received from nature. Notice that this respected Mason did not say these rights came from God. He said they came from nature. I will show you additional information that other Masons do not believe that there is a creator God in the universe. Weishaupt continued. Property struck the first blow at equality. Political society or governments were the first dispossessors of liberty. The supporters of governments and property are the religious and civil laws. Therefore, to reinstate man in his primitive rights of equality and liberty, we must begin by destroying all religion, all civil society, and finish by the destruction of all property. So we can now summarize the beliefs of the Illuminati. We must abolish monarchy and all ordered government. We must abolish private property. We must abolish the rights of inheritance, meaning the right to pass on what you've accumulated to your heirs. We must abolish patriotism or nationalism, meaning the destruction of national borders. We must abolish the family, marriage, and morality, and we must abolish all religion. These are precisely the same thoughts expressed by the communist Karl Marx. There is no direct evidence, but there is abundant circumstantial evidence to say that Karl Marx was a later member of the Illuminati when it was no longer called the Illuminati but the Communist Party. So we can summarize all that we have examined so far. The old world order has to be replaced. And we can see that the communists, the Illuminati, the New Age, and the Masonic Lodge are out to destroy the old civilization and replace it with communism. This new civilization, based on the principles of communism, is now being called the New World Order. The Masons believe that the God of the Bible has created chaos in heaven. This is what we've been reading to show you in the past from their own literature. The Masons believe that God created chaos. This is a copy of the 32nd degree certificate, a 32nd degree certificate. A friend of mine was a 32nd degree Mason, and he gave me a copy of a certificate that he received after he completed the 32nd degree. Notice the phrase ordo ab chaos in the middle. Ordo ab chaos means, in Latin, order out of chaos. As we have seen, the Masons admit that the God of the Bible created chaos in the universe, and after man is freed to use his mind in all areas, the universe will become ordered. The Masons have decided it. As we've already seen, they will create Masonic religion, Masonic law, and Masonic property. And they call this condition, quote, order, unquote, instead of the chaos created by the God of the Bible. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, the socialist, summarized it best when he said the same thing. God is tyranny. God is evil. God is nothing more than the executor of my reason. And Terry Cole Whitaker, the New Age leader I've quoted before, tells us that this will be the future of the New World. The New World will be a world in which there will be none of the things that make up the misery of the old world today, meaning the old world order. We have an opportunity to create a new reality and to put an end to the old. That means that in the New World Order, there will be no more morality. Each man will be free to decide for himself what is right and wrong. It is true. It is not just the Masons who want to abolish religion. You might remember that quote that I read earlier in this lecture from Franklin Roosevelt's speech of October the 27th, 1941, to the nation. He said that Hitler's plan for his New World Order, also desired by the Masonic Lodge, was a plan to abolish all existing religions. Now anyone can see that the Masons want the same thing. As I said, there is a new religion spreading around the world called the New Age religion. One of the most articulate of its writers is Terry Cole Whitaker, the woman I've just quoted. She wrote, "There will be no more God of vengeance for us to fear, and therefore no more God-fearing people." She wrote, "The New Age will mean the end of religion." She wrote that it'll also mean the end of government. Everyone will govern themselves. There'll be no more tyrants and no more organizations to tell us what is good for us and what is bad. It sounds like to me that Terry Cole Whitaker is saying the same things that the communists and the Masons are saying, and the socialists as well. I'd like to repeat what Pierre Joseph Proudhon, the socialist, said when he said the same thing. He said, God is tyranny, God is evil, God is nothing more than the executor of my reason. Now let me connect all that we have learned so far with the founding of America, because those who believe in this New World Order were active in the founding of this nation. Manly P. Hall wrote this book entitled The Secret Destiny of America. I think it will interest you to know that according to Mr. Hall, America has a secret destiny. Mr. Hall wrote, years of research has convinced me that there exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is interesting to note here that the Illuminati means the enlightened ones. This body, is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. Secret, I say, because this high purpose is not realized by the many. Not only were many of the founders of the United States government Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe. It sounds like he, meaning Mr. Hall, was referring to the Illuminati founded in 1776. It is known that many of the founders knew about the Illuminati when they founded this nation, which helped them, this group, this august group in Europe, helped them establish this country for a particular purpose known only to the initiated few. America does have a secret destiny. Our founding fathers knew what it was, because our founding fathers had been initiated into the secret mystery religion that was to bring us the New World Order. The Supreme Council of the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry agrees that many of the founders were Masons. This is a slide of Henry C. Clausen, the past sovereign grand commander of the Masons, and he reported that 23 of the 39 signers of the Constitution were members of the Masonic Lodge. Notice that the 23 Masons constituted a majority of all of the founders, those who signed the Constitution. It might be appropriate here to mention that the number 13 is a magic number to the Masons. We shall see more of this in a few minutes. It is interesting to note that the number 39 is the product of the multiplication of 3 by 13. So there appears to be a concealed number 13 in the number of signers of the Constitution. Manly P. Hall told us Benjamin Franklin spoke for the Order of the Quest, and most of the men who worked with him in the early days of the American Revolution were also members. Now, history has recorded that Benjamin Franklin was a very visible member of the Masonic Order, and Mr. Hall is now telling us that he was also a spokesman for the Order of the Quest. This is a drawing of Mr. Franklin in his Masonic attire. Now let us return to America's secret destiny. I'd like to show you the two sides of the Great Seal of the United States. You will no doubt recognize them because these two seals are reproduced on the back of the dollar bill. This is called the obverse side, meaning the front side, the eagle side. And this is a little different version of the same seal that we see whenever the President of the United States speaks to the public. But at least it is more recognizable than the reverse side, meaning the back side of the Great Seal of the United States. These two seals were adopted in 1782 by the founding fathers of the United States, but the reverse side was not shown to the American people until 1935. This is a copy of the original paperwork that President Franklin Roosevelt signed, putting the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the dollar bill. And this is a photograph of Franklin Roosevelt seated in the middle, in the center, in his Masonic apron. If you will notice, you'll see the white apron around his waist. Henry Wallace was his vice president, and he was the man who recommended that Franklin Roosevelt put the Great Seal on the back of the dollar bill. Henry Wallace was a 32nd degree Mason. I'd like to continue now with Mr. Hall's charges that America was set up by the Order of the Quest. He wrote this: if the design on the obverse side, meaning the side with the eagle, is stamped with the signature of the Order of the Quest. The design on the reverse is even more definitely related to the old mysteries. What he was saying was that these symbols on our dollar bill are not there by accident. They're related to the ancient worship of what he later called the ancient mystery religion. Mr. Hall continued, the Great Seal is the signature of this exalted body, meaning the Order of the Quest or the Masons, and the unfinished pyramid upon its reverse side is a trestle board, setting forth symbolically the task to the accomplishment of which the United States government was dedicated from the day of its inception. That means that the founding fathers who designed the Great Seal knew what they were doing. They were committing this nation to the ancient mystery religion. Notice that the eye above the pyramid is not yet on top of the pyramid. That means that their task is not yet accomplished. When the eye seats itself on the pyramid, their job will be finished. And I'm contending that the date for that capping of the pyramid is known. That date has been determined, and it will occur on January the 1st, the year 2000 AD. I will explain why this date is significant a little later in this lecture. Mr. Hall continued, there's only one possible origin for these symbols, and that is the secret societies which came to this country 150 years before the Revolutionary War. If you take 150 years from 1776, the date of our founding, you get the date of 1620, about the date the Pilgrims came to America. So what he was saying is that at the same time the Pilgrims came to America, the conspirators came as well. He goes on to point out there can be no question that the Great Seal was directly inspired by these orders of the human quest, and that it, here he's talking about the Great Seal, set forth the purpose for this nation as that purpose was seen and known to the founding fathers. It is true, America has a secret destiny, and the founding fathers knew what it was. Those who gave us the Great Seal of the United States knew what they were doing when they incorporated the Latin phrases, an all-seeing eye, a pyramid, an eagle, and the use of concealed Masonic numbers on it. I'd like to explain just what all of these symbols mean as I continue this lecture. We will examine the hidden meaning behind the symbols of our Great Seal of the United States. The reason our founding fathers placed these symbols on our Great Seal is because they were conspirators. The next area we should discuss is the type of government these conspirators gave us. For years, we've been told that the American form of government, called a constitutional republic, was the finest form ever devised by men, and that the American Constitution is the finest document ever written by the mind of man. And I used to believe that as well, until I discovered the fact that the founding fathers literally placed a phrase in our Constitution that they knew would later destroy it. Because as thousands of today's patriots have discovered when they have gone into the courts of America to argue the constitutionality of various laws and regulation, they have learned that the Constitution of the United States of America is null and void. There are no constitutional rights in the courts of the United States today. And the reason that this is so is because the nation's founding fathers set it up so that there wouldn't be any. And the reason they did that was because they were members of the Masons or of a broader organization apparently called the Order of the Quest. To prove that the Constitution is null and void in America today, we must go back to the year 1776 when we severed all ties to the English government. This is a copy of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to read a part from that right now. I would like to call your attention to one very important thing. It was here in the preamble that we, the people, declared that this was the unanimous declaration of the 13 united with a small u states of America. There was no such thing as the capital U United States of America at that time, as the men who wrote documents were saying that we, as representatives of these 13 states, each united in their cause, were part of a nation known as America. Later, this will become an important point, as we shall soon see. Our founding fathers were not created a nation called the United States of America. We were simply Americans, each a citizen of their respective state, that were uniting to declare themselves independent from the King of England. We, the people, carefully declared that we were objecting to the tyrannical government of King George of Great Britain that he had set up here in America. You can find the following in the second paragraph of the Declaration. We, the people, wrote, the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To understand what that means, we must next define the word tyranny. Webster's 1828 dictionary, issued only 52 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, defined the word thusly: tyranny, despotic exercise of power, absolute monarchy, or absolute power. The dictionary also defined the word despot, a word we don't use too often in today's language. It said that the word despot was a king, and I believe it meant any governmental authority, because most of the governments in 1828 were being led by kings, so that was the typical government at the time. So we're saying that a despot was any government invested with absolute ruling or absolute power, or ruling without any control from men, constitution, or laws. So it is fair to conclude that the founding fathers felt that King George was creating a tyranny and all-powerful government in America, and that was the reason they were breaking from the monarchy. To further show that the founding fathers knew what the word tyranny meant, we can examine the Federalist Papers written in 1787 by John Jay on the left, James Madison in the center, and Alexander Hamilton on the right. Hamilton and Madison actually signed the Constitution, which meant that they must have approved of whatever it contained. James Madison defined the word tyranny in Federalist Papers number 47. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Madison later defined it again when he talked about a tyrannical concentration of all the same power of government in the same hands. He later quoted Montesquieu, a political writer in the mid-17th century, who wrote this: "There can be no liberty where the legislative and executive powers are united in the same body of magistrates." Then the writers of the Declaration listed 28 specific evidences that King George was guilty of creating an oppressive government, a tyranny in the United States. The 22nd of those reads, "He," meaning King George, "has given his assent to the suspending of our own legislatures and declaring themselves with power to," please remember this next phrase, "they declared themselves with the power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever." Please remember that phrase. The king was taking all power in one body, the legislature, the very definition of tyranny. Our founding fathers knew what tyranny was, and that King George was guilty of creating a tyrannical government by replacing America's legislatures. Now the Constitution was issued in 1787, 11 years later. This is from the preamble. "We, the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Notice that they were claiming to be creating a government of the United States of America. The Constitution creates three branches of government because the founding fathers knew that to give all power to one branch of government was the very definition of tyranny. Our founding fathers created the legislative branch of government in Article 1, the executive branch of government in Article 2, and the judicial branch of government in Article 3. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution grants 18 specific powers to Congress, such as the power to collect taxes, the power to coin money, the power to establish post offices, and the power to declare war, amongst others. But in amongst those grants of power, they placed the cancer cell, the one they knew would destroy the very republic they were creating. This is what they wrote. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. Notice that we read that phrase somewhere else. We have just read that same phrase in the Declaration of Independence. When they used that phrase in the Declaration, they were defining the word tyranny. But when they used the same phrase in the Constitution, they were giving powers to Congress. The power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. It is impossible not to conclude that the Founding Fathers gave Congress tyrannical powers. They did so in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Remember that the Founding Fathers accused King George of creating a tyranny by declaring themselves with the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. They granted Congress the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. They used the same words. They knew what they were doing because they wrote the Constitution only 11 years after they wrote the Declaration of Independence. Notice one more thing. This all-powerful, all-tyrannical government that our Founding Fathers created was limited to just one place only. The Founding Fathers continued Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, of course they're meaning here Washington, D.C., as may become the seat of the government of the United States. So the Founding Fathers were giving this tyrannical power to Congress in just one place, Washington, D.C. It is interesting when you remember that the residents of Washington, D.C. today do not elect a congressman, and they've never elected a congressman. They do not elect a senator today, and they've never elected a senator. The people who live in Washington, D.C. are being taxed without representation. They have no representatives in Congress to represent them as Congress passes laws. Their affairs are being handled by Congress, and this is called, quite simply, taxation without representation. That was supposedly the reason that the American people dissolved the Union with Great Britain. This was supposedly the issue in the American Revolution. The American people were breaking with the English government because they were being taxed without having any representation in how that money was collected or utilized. But our Founding Fathers set up a government that could tax the citizens in Washington, D.C. without any representation. This is very strange indeed. This limited grant of power is limited to only one part of America. These congressmen have this power, this tyrannical power, only in Washington, D.C. So what that means is that Congress has tyrannical powers to run Washington, D.C. When Congress interferes in the remainder of America, meaning the 50 states, it operates on Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 16, 18 in the Bill of Rights. Those powers are very specific. It is limited to very specific powers, all spelled out in great detail by the Founding Fathers. And the 10th Amendment further restricts the power of the government of the United States of America. It reads, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. It becomes important to notice that we patriots who thought that the 10th Amendment limited the powers of the federal government have been fooled once again. I always believed that this 10th Amendment restricted Congress, but notice that it says that if we didn't give the power to the United States, they don't have it. And I, along with most American patriots, felt that we were being protected by the 10th Amendment. But what they are saying is if we didn't give the power to the government of the United States, the power stays with the people or with the states. But our Founding Fathers gave all power to the government of the United States, and the people can have all that is left. But there is no power left if you give all power to the government of the United States. So there is no question, and I know this is very hard to believe, our Founding Fathers were traitors and liars. Our Founding Fathers deserve only the worst condemnations possible. Our Founding Fathers deserve to be ranked with the worst scoundrels of all time. So the Founding Fathers gave Congress unlimited power to run Washington, D.C. Notice that they wrote the Constitution for the United States of America. But when they created the government in Washington, D.C., they called it the government of the United States. They were creating two separate constitutional governments in America. One is called the government of the United States, which administers Washington, D.C. with tyrannical powers. And the second is called the government of the United States of America, which administers the constitutional powers over the 50 states. It is called a limited republic with specified powers. There was not much concern with this tyrannical power in the government of the United States until the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868 after the Civil War. The 14th Amendment reads in part, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Also notice that there are two ways to become a citizen of the United States. The amendment says that you can be born inside Washington, D.C., or you can become a naturalized citizen. A naturalized citizen is one who voluntarily asks to become an American, because when you do, you become subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So we, the people of the United States of America, are now citizens of the United States. If you were not born in Washington, D.C., you are a naturalized citizen. Now, how did we become a naturalized citizen when we declared ourselves to be the people of the United States of America? And here's the answer. We voluntarily accepted a Social Security card issued by the government of the United States. When we accepted our Social Security card, we voluntarily gave up our sovereignty to the government of the United States. And when we did that, we voluntarily gave jurisdiction over us to that government that has tyrannical power. Now, we thought we had to obtain a Social Security card, and we did so because we allowed ourselves to be tricked into believing we had to get a Social Security card. I want you to know there is no law requiring any of us to get a Social Security card. We get one because we think we have to. We are not required to do so. And patriots are now asking the Social Security Administration to remove their number from the files with some degree of success. This is a letter showing that the tax is voluntary. It was written by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. That means that they know that the tax is voluntary. That means that they are guilty of deception. And it is also important to point out that income taxes are voluntary. Income taxes are not law required. They're not mandatory. I am a self-employed writer and publisher, and I pay an estimated tax each quarter, and to do so I use this form called the 1040 ES. The paragraph in the top middle, underlined in blue, reads as follows. Who must make estimated tax payments? Notice what it says. These rules, these laws, no, it says these rules apply to U.S. citizens. Notice that the IRS says that these are rules, not laws, and that these rules apply only to U.S. citizens. Only U.S. citizens must pay the tax. So if you are neither a naturalized U.S. citizen nor born in Washington, D.C., it appears as if you do not have to pay a tax under these rules. I am not saying that you must not pay taxes. I am saying that it appears as if these rules only apply to persons born in Washington, D.C., or to naturalized citizens who have voluntarily given the government in Washington, D.C. jurisdiction over their person. Let me provide you with one more evidence that there are two governments in the United States. As far as preliminary research indicates, the post office cannot charge more than 2 cents per half ounce for mail sent between any two states in the United States of America. Any shipment of a piece of mail between any two states is called non-domestic mail. And the United States government apparently has no jurisdiction over anything more than that. This is a letter sent to me from Florida. Notice that the envelope bearing the 2 cent stamp used to pay the postage for it was not marked returned for postage. It went through. Notice that the wording that the sender put on the letter under the stamp. The letter went through without postage due. And this is the wording that the sender used to get the mail through for 2 cents. The non-domestic letter rate of 2 cents per half ounce is established by congressional law, 12 statutes at large, Chapter 71, Section 23. Any other rate constitutes a criminal violation of United States Code 1728. So what I am saying is that someone in the U.S. Postal Service knows that there are two governments in the United States. There's one more evidence that we are right. The draft of civilians into the United States Armed Forces is not constitutional under the powers granted to the government of the United States of America. The draft was passed by the Congress, which was exercising its tyrannical power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. Those who have gone through the induction ceremony tell me that each draftee is asked to take one step forward as they enlist. This is reportedly the one step that each draftee takes to indicate that he is doing so voluntarily. He is indicating that he is voluntarily taking one step forward so that he is giving jurisdiction to the government of the United States. I have been told that if he stands pat, in other words, if he does not take the step forward, giving jurisdiction to the government, there is nothing that the government can do to the draftee. I want to make it clear that I am not recommending that anyone stop paying taxes, nor that they send mail inside the 50 states for 2 cents, nor that they get out of the Social Security system, nor that they avoid the draft by not taking that one step forward. What I am saying is that there needs to be some court cases clearly establishing that these statements are true, so that we can absolutely know for certain that this preliminary research is correct. The one book telling us how this can be legally accomplished has yet to be written. I have not seen that book yet, so I have personally not decided to get out of the system. But it has been reported to me that thousands of people are getting out of the system each year by claiming that they are not citizens of the government of the United States. But I continue to pay my federal taxes. By the way, I pay my income taxes to Uncle Marx, not Uncle Sam, because Uncle Marx, meaning Uncle Karl Marx, was the father of the graduated income tax. Once again, this is the Communist Manifesto that we've looked at before. It was written by Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. And on page 46 of the book, Karl Marx called for a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Remember that this book was written by the communist Karl Marx in 1848. And we didn't get our heavy progressive or graduate income tax until 1913. Now, those who disagree with my assessment that we are not citizens of the government of the United States must answer this question. What were we before the 14th Amendment if we were not citizens of the United States? Why did they have to declare us citizens of the government of the United States if we were already citizens of the government of the United States? And the answer to that one question is because we were called sovereign citizens of the state in which you were born. You were called an American. But after the 14th Amendment, we were called citizens of the government of the United States. A sovereign is someone who lives by God-given inalienable right. A citizen is one who lives by government-granted privilege. A privilege can be taken away by the one granting the privilege. Rights cannot be taken away except by the grantor, in this case meaning the Creator God of the Bible. Simply stated in one sentence, we have lost our sovereignty. I would like to pose a question to those who believe my position is incorrect on Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, being the clause that gives government tyrannical power. If I am wrong, where I claim that the powers we gave Congress are very specific, and if we did not specifically grant government any specific power, they do not have it. Where did the Founding Fathers give Congress the power to tax us, to build a space telescope, to take pictures of the distant planets? How could our Founding Fathers have envisioned such a thing? How could they have written this into the Constitution? Congress shall have the power to build telescopes that shall be placed in orbit above the Earth to take photographs of distant planets. How could they have even dreamed about such a thing in the 1780s? Yet Congress has taxed us to build the Hubble Space Telescope, which is in orbit right now. Let's say that we had the ability to go back to 1776, when they were debating the powers to give to Congress, and we had asked them to include a provision granting us power to build a space telescope. Just what do you think their answer would have been to our request? There is no such thing as a space telescope. They could not have conceived of such a thing in 1780. Yet in the 1980s, Congress passed legislation creating the power to orbit the Hubble Space Telescope. Where did they get the power if the founding fathers did not give it to them? They got it from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Congress shall have the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. The Hubble Space Telescope confirms my allegations. Congress has unlimited power, meaning they have the power to do whatever their fiendish little minds can devise. The power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. And who were these founding fathers who tricked us by creating a hidden tyrannical government? They were the Masons who wrote the Constitution. The Constitution was the joint work of half a dozen men or more, yet today few historians begrudge James Madison, later to become President of the United States, as being the father of the Constitution. Because the author of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 was James Madison himself. In fact, in 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower commissioned a study entitled Jurisdiction over Federal Areas within the States. That study made the conclusion, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution was included in the Constitution as a result of proposals made to the Constitutional Convention by Charles Pinckney and James Madison. There were some who objected to the grant of tyrannical powers, according to the Eisenhower report. Objections made by Patrick Henry and others based upon the dangers to personal rights and liberties which Clause 17 presented were anticipated or replied to by Mr. Madison. That means that Mr. Madison knew that his grant was going to cause controversy, so he anticipated it. So Patrick Henry, because he objected to the tyrannical provisions of this provision, the tyrannical powers of this provision, goes to the top of my list of great American patriots, and James Madison goes to the bottom. The report goes on, they, meaning those who objected, were assured that the rights of residents of federalized areas would be protected by appropriate reservations made by the states in granting their respective consents to federalization. That means that whatever argument that Madison used convinced the dissenters that their rights would be protected by the states. But notice this incredible omission by the Eisenhower Commission members in their report. It may be noted that this assurance has to this time borne only little fruit. The dissenters were lied to. Their rights were not protected by this incredible grant of power to the Congress. They were hoodwinked by James Madison. We, the sovereign people of America, gave up our sovereignty by a fraudulent argument. Those who granted the power knew what they were doing. In other words, there was cause for concern in 1787. There was cause for concern in 1956, but nothing has been done to correct the situation. So I'm saying there was cause for concern even today in 1994. And last question, was it a coincidence that James Madison, the tyrant, was a Mason? No, because that is precisely what the order of the quest would have wanted him to write into the Constitution. James Madison did what he was expected to do. This is an official list of the presidents who have been Masons prepared by the Masonic Lodge itself. And under the name, under the yellow highlighter, is James Madison, President of the United States. I'd like to return to the discussion of the involvement of the Masonic Lodge in the founding of America. This is a very poor quality photocopy of a picture of the prayer window in a prayer room for legislators in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Notice that George Washington is kneeling at prayer in the middle of the stained glass window, and that he is under the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States. It is almost as if those who designed the window knew that George Washington, a Mason, was praying to the God in the all-seeing eye of the Great Seal of the United States. Also notice that the Masons have concealed a key Masonic number in the window. There are 33 reversals of the double lines shown on each side of the stained glass window. And as we're going to see later, the number 33 is a key Masonic number of great significance, as I will prove in a few minutes. As I will show you, it was not just another coincidence, but it was a concealed Masonic symbol. Before we continue our study of the secret destiny of America, we must examine an area which is pertinent to our study. we must examine the question of why early man worshipped the sun. The sun in the sky does two observable things. First of all, it rises each morning and sets each evening. It appears to be born in the morning and then die in the evening each day, and then it appears to come back to life the next day when it rises again. Early man realized that he was also born and then died, but that he couldn't come back to life after he died. He knew that after he died, he couldn't come back the next day. So he started imagining that the sun was some sort of God, because he reasoned that only a God can die and then come back to life. And the second way that the sun appears to be born and then appears to die again is because the sun travels on the horizon as it sets each day. This is because the earth tilts back and forth on its axis as it revolves around the sun. So the sun moves north and south across the horizon and sets at a different place every day. It appears to set at a different position on the horizon each day, and early man felt that only gods could do that. Here is a photograph of the sun setting at a particular point on the horizon. It appears to move northward once a year and sets at a particular point. The sun appears to set at this precise point for 3 days, and then it starts moving south again. This happens twice a year, on June the 25th and on December the 25th. That means that on June 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, and December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of each year, the sun appears to be setting at the same precise location. But on June the 25th and December 25th, it starts to move back to the north or to the south. It appears to die for 3 days and then appears to come back to life on June the 25th and December 25th. And since only gods can die and come back to life, early man reasoned that this was further evidence that the sun must be a god. Now, there is actually a word to describe this activity of the sun. It is called the solstice, meaning when the sun is farthest away from the equator. It occurs twice a year, on June the 22nd and on December the 22nd each year. According to this book, entitled An ABC of Witchcraft, written by a practicing witch, the witches make a holiday out of each solstice. She wrote this: the winter solstice celebrates the rebirth of the sun. Not only do the witches worship the sun god on the winter solstice, others do as well. Albert Pike wrote this on page 77 of Morals and Dogma. Thousands of years ago, man worshipped the sun. Originally, they looked beyond the orb to the invisible God. Then he identified those gods who had a concealed worship of the sun god inside their regular worship. They personified the sun god as Brahma, Amun, Osiris, Bel, Adonis, Melkarth, Mithras, and Apollo. He went on to point out that the Romans celebrated a holiday known as Saturnalia for 1 week, December 17th to the 24th. Then December 25th became a special holiday called the birth of the unconquerable sun. Author John Robinson says that the winter solstice festival celebrates the victory of the sun over the powers of darkness. I'd now like to suspend that discussion for another area of interest that's related. I'd like to explain why people in America celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December. Christmas is supposed to be the birthday of Jesus Christ, but Jesus Christ was not born in December, nor even in the winter of the year. The Bible tells the reader when Jesus was born. His birth is talked about in Luke 2:8. The writer wrote, there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock at night, by night. Shepherds at the time always brought their flocks from the mountainsides and fields and corralled them not later than October the 15th to protect them from the cold, rainy season that followed. They would be outside in the fields during lambing season when they attempted to protect their young lambs from wolves. And to illustrate that point, I'd like to discuss a story about a friend of mine. In September of 1991, I called a gentleman who is a computer buff. He has created a chronology institute that studies biblical dates. He claims that he has put all of the dates in the Bible and that he has been able to determine that Christ was born on April the 5th, 6 BC. and that he died on April the 5th, 30 AD. That means that Jesus lived 35 years and was resurrected when he was precisely 35 years old. But today, the world celebrates Jesus' birthday on a holiday dedicated to the annual rebirth of the sun, December 25th. Now, we bring in an evergreen tree into our home and call it a Christmas tree because an evergreen tree does not die during the time the sun goes south during the winter to die. It lives while the sun god dies. We place round balls on our tree because the sun is round and we're bringing light into our house. And we put candles or lights on the tree now as a way of bringing light into the house while the sun god is dying. So Christmas is a pagan holiday. I, for one, do not celebrate Christmas on December 25th. I personally celebrate the birth of Jesus every day of my life. Now, I'd like to return to our discussion of the sun. So the next step in history of our past is when priests developed around the worship of the sun. They told the people that they should pray to them because there was a danger that the sun would not return the next day or after it died twice each year. And inside that worship of the sun god, they developed the idea that the sun was a symbol of another god. So man has deified the sun. We put a face on the sun. The sun has no face. It is not a god. It is the sun. And that sun, by the way, will one day burn itself out. Albert Pike wrote about this in his book entitled Legenda. The sages of all the ancient races had a secret and holy doctrine which was not made known to the people at large. When these worshipped the star, the sages adored that which manifested itself as the star. When these worshipped the fire and light, the sages worshipped the invisible principle from which the light flowed out. The next thing that happened was that this religion of the sun god spread all over the world. All religions today worship a god, but all of them differ in their conception of that god. But I think that they all agree on one thing. All religions agree on a force of evil. But most of these religions do not believe that this force of evil is a god. So it can be a true statement that the one thing that most religions can agree on is a belief in a force of evil. This is a book entitled The History and the Idea of the Devil by Paul Karras. In the introduction to this book, the writer says, Mr. Karras probed the myths and religious symbols of a number of cultures to siphon out the one common element, the devil. A reviewer of Mr. Karras' book made this comment about the author. Karras found the devil to be a perfectly charming fellow. All religions have a common denominator, the devil. But some of those religions have made this force of evil into a god, and that this worship of this force of evil as a god has been kept from the worshippers. Someone else who made just such an observation was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky in her book entitled The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1. In every religion, we find the concealed deity forming the groundwork. So the concealed worship of another god inside the public worship of a god is common to all religions, as we shall see. Also, the sun and also the serpent are symbols of this concealed worship of this other god. For example, Mr. Karras talks about this concealed worship on page 121 of his book. He makes this observation. In some parts of India, the serpent is the symbol of perfection and wisdom. That sounds like the teaching of the book of Genesis, yet India is not known as a Christian or Jewish nation. And the Masons acknowledge that Masonry is also found in all religions. In his book entitled Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods, the author, also a Mason, wrote this. Brother Ward, and Mr. Ward is a Masonic writer that this author quotes in his book, traces a substratum of Masonry in all the great religious systems of the world. So the God being worshipped by the Masons is also the God being worshipped in all of the hidden concealed worships all over the world. And all religions, including the religion known as Masonry, knows just who this hidden God is in their worship. One explained it quite simply. This is once again the book written by a female witch, and she stated it very simply on page 14 of her book. She wrote, Lucifer is the god of the sun. This is the simplest way to say it. The concealed God in the worships of the world is simply called Lucifer, also called the devil or Satan in the Bible. So what we are going to examine during this lecture is this worship of the sun god Lucifer and his plans for the future of the world with this thing that the major world leaders are calling for, called the New World Order. So we're going to examine this secret, hidden, 6,000-year-old worldwide worship of the sun god Lucifer and his plans for a new world order. I am not aware of any other historian in the world who is exposing this secret worship of Lucifer, but it needs to be done. Because quite simply, this future Luciferian New World Order is not very pleasant. The people of the world would not accept it unless it was being brought to them through deceptions and lies. And this is exactly what is happening. The New World Order is being brought to the people of the world through lies, deceptions, and dishonesty. The leaders of the world are simply not telling the truth. This is the Masonic symbol that we've looked at before. Notice the square and the compass have the letter G in the center. I'd like to show you that the Masons also worship the sun. W.L. Wilmshurst, a Masonic writer, wrote this: the G had its equivalent in the Egyptian mysteries in the solar symbol of Ra, the spiritual sun. In an article that appeared in the Masonic New Age magazine, July 1985, the author said, in ancient symbolism, the square signified the earth, while the circle, a figure produced with the compasses, signified the sun or the heavens. Remember that the circle is a symbol of the sun, and that the Masons proudly display a compass, an object that can produce a circle, in their symbol. Another Masonic magazine called the Royal Arch Mason added this comment: in the Egyptian mythology, the circle was a hieroglyphic symbol, or sign rather, or emblem of the sun god Ra. Now this is a slide of a gold head of the Egyptian sun god Ra. It consists of a ram with the sun disk on its head and two cobras around its temple. Cobra, of course, is a snake. So sun worship is not new. It has been here for centuries, as we shall see, and it is worldwide. I want to make a point at this juncture. What I will be examining during this lecture is that I have found a secret concealed worship of a god in the world. I have found that this secret worship has been conducted worldwide for some 6,000 years. I have found that the knowledge about this worship has been buried by historians of the past, and I have found that the major symbols of this concealed god are the sun and the serpent. I have found that the worship of every major god of the past, including even the God of the Bible, in part, has concealed a secret worship of the hidden God. And that means that for 6,000 years, man has been worshiping a hidden God right in front of the world, and the world has not taken notice of it. And that statement is probably the single most important historic truth in the world, probably second only to the simple historic truth that Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. Because the fact that this concealed worship has been kept secret from mankind for centuries has directly affected every aspect of our lives. Briefly stated once again, the God worship for 6,000 years behind the symbolism of the sun and the serpent is Lucifer, also called Satan or the devil in the Bible. What we are going to examine in the remainder of this lecture is this worship of the sun god Lucifer and his plans for the future with this thing that the major world leaders are calling for, called the New World Order. It shall be my intent to expose you to the secret, hidden, 6,000-year-old worldwide worship of Lucifer and his plans for a new world order. Let me continue our study of the worship of the sun god Lucifer on this earth. This is a picture taken from a Life magazine of a couple years ago, and this is a picture of a Mayan temple at Chichen Itza. And the article quotes a Mayan prayer to the sun. You are God, our Father, our Master in the sky. Sun, sun, you shed your light on us. The sun is the symbol of another God, and the light is the truth that God teaches us. Another Mason, Wilfred Gregson, wrote this about the serpents built into the monuments at Chichen Itza. One symbol of great prominence throughout all ancient civilizations is the snake or serpent, where it symbolized divine wisdom. So the next symbol we must study is the snake or serpent. This is a real snake, of course, and in the Bible, Lucifer appeared to man as a snake. But ever since, man has been worshiping the snake as a god. Snake worship is universal and timeless. This is a book entitled Serpent in the Sky, and its cover shows a piece of Egyptian artwork in gold. On the piece of gold, we see a man being carried to the heavens by a serpent. The green arrow points to the hieroglyphic symbol of a man seated on the back of the serpent. And in this picture, the green arrow points to the head of the snake flying the man to the heavens. And lastly, these are the stars the snake is taking the man to in the heavens. So the lesson is that man can get to heaven, meaning he can reach God on the back of a snake. This is an article that proclaims that Hopi Indian leaders prefer that the American government not build a particular project because it will disturb the ground where many snakes live. There are many who believe that the Hopi Indians are the most spiritual of all the Indian tribes. The article quotes a Hopi tribal leader as saying, "We use snakes for our prayers. They are our messengers. These snakes, are our brothers. They are closer to the earth." So the snake takes a message to the god of the Hopis. Snake worship is universal and timeless. This is a drawing of a coin from the city of Tyre. Tyre was the capital of Phoenicia and was founded in around 2750 BC. So this coin might be several thousand years old. The drawing shows a snake cut off from its home. The tree has been cut down before its time, meaning that the snake is trying to restore his home by exerting its pressure on the tree stump. His kingdom was cut away before he could complete his task, and he is exerting pressure on the tree, hoping that it will return to the form of his old kingdom. The cornucopia to the left of the tree is empty. That means that the bounty is to be received from his kingdom, his future, when the snake revives the palm tree back to its previous glory. The palm tree to the right is a sign of victory, that the snake's victory on the earth will occur. In other words, the snake will succeed in bringing his paradise to the earth, and that paradise is called the New World Order. This is a drawing of the Aztec sun calendar on the cover of a book published by Reader's Digest. This picture shows the calendar in its entirety. The face in the center is a symbol of the sun god and, of course, is a circle. And this is the same calendar cut away to reveal the existence of two enormous snakes around the circle. The heads of the snake on either side are on either side of where 6 o'clock would be, and their tails are at the top of the circle. And the next slide is a more recent example of the snake as some sort of symbol. This is the hood ornament off of the Alfa Romeo automobile. Notice that there is a line dividing the ornament into two separate different symbols, the snake or the cross. The hood ornament appears to be saying that there is a choice in the world, either the cross of Jesus or the snake of the unknown God. The snake also has a crown drawn above its head, as if the snake is either a god or a king. The snake appears to have a man in its mouth, and I do not know if the snake is devouring the man or if he is giving birth to the man. My guess would be that the snake is giving birth to the enlightened man. In other words, the man who has figured out who the snake represents. I didn't think I was right until I found this book entitled Magic Symbols. And this is part of page number 6 of that book. It shows a very dark picture of the snake and the man, reportedly taken from a 13th century building in Italy. Now, you can't see that very well. Maybe you can see the one on the right. But there's the snake devouring the man or passing him out. And you'll see it in the black outline in the first picture on the left. And this is a picture of the figures of the snake and the man being colored in to show you what they look like. The author of the book claims that the snake is devouring the man, but it appears to work as well as a symbol of the serpent giving birth to the illumined man. The book went on to say the image of a man being swallowed by the serpent of wisdom is really a portrayal of the man entering into the body of the snake entering into wisdom. So then the book identified who the snake of wisdom was. Such a snake itself is therefore a symbol of Satan. So here we see a book briefly explaining the symbols of the world, admitting that they know that the snake is a worldwide symbol of Satan. This is a picture of a snake involved in a voodoo religious ceremony. There's a woman bent back on her, she's on her feet, and those are her knees. Maybe you can't see that, but in the middle of her body is a snake being held in either of her two hands. The snake goes across her midsection. The article says that the woman sacrificed a child to the snake. This is a picture of the sacred cobra from a Buddhist temple in Ceylon. The book that showed the picture said that the cobra was the symbol of eternal wisdom. You might remember that Cleopatra, the woman they write movies about from the past, decided to commit suicide by allowing a snake to bite her. She lived in a country that believed in the snake as a god. She might have decided to allow a poisonous snake to bite her so that she could become illuminated as part of her religion. This is an article in Trade magazine that appeared on February the 3rd, 1991, that reports in the left-hand side under the yellow that former Senator Barry Goldwater had the image of a snake tattooed on his left hand. The article did not say why that was, but it is known that Barry Goldwater is a 33rd degree Mason. I wonder if that has something to do with that. This is a book written by Peter Tompkins entitled Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids. I'm going to take a close-up of the snake at the center because under the pink arrow is an enormous head of the snake, and it shows its head is open, its mouth is open, implying that it is speaking to the people. It was found at the ruins of Chichen Itza, Mexico. The pyramid in the back is dedicated to the god known as Quetzalcoatl, and I'll discuss that god in a few minutes. Chichen Itza is in the Yucatan, south of Mexico in Latin America, on the Gulf of Mexico. You'll see it right in the middle of this map, the two words Chichen Itza. At Chichen Itza, the temple of the east has a great many repeats of a huge sunburst. From the middle of the sunburst is a head of a serpent, a huge head of a serpent. The sun represents God, and the serpent his divine wisdom. And so one of the temples of the sun god worldwide is a pyramid. This is a slide of one of those temples to the sun god in Mexico. Notice that its top is flat, and as we are going to see, all pyramids on the earth are flat on top, and there is a reason that that is true. I'll try to explain that reason for you a little later. The obvious question is to answer is, why would people build a pyramid anywhere? And I think the obvious answer is for the people physically to get closer to the sun god. This is a book entitled The Two Babylons, written by Reverend Alexander Hislop, a Christian minister. He wrote about the sun god worship, and this is what he said. Along with the sun as the great fire god, and in due time identified with him, was the serpent worshipped. In the mythology of the primitive world, the serpent is universally the symbol of the sun. In Egypt, one of the commonest symbols of the sun or sun god is a disc with a serpent around it. You might remember this picture that Rex Hudson showed us in his book entitled A Bridge to Light. It showed a snake around the oblong-shaped circle, and here we see the close association of the serpent god and the sun. This slide illustrates the point. The two red arrows point to two sculptures of the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, and they show two serpents protruding from a symbol of the sun. Those rock figures are on a wall of a temple to the sun god Quetzalcoatl in a Mayan village in Latin America. The green arrow points to a stone portrait of my former mother-in-law, and I don't know how that picture or that statue got down there. We will continue to see that association as we continue this lecture. This is a National Geographic's picture of an Egyptian relief painting, apparently on a wall dug into the rock, showing Ramses II seated on the right, making an offering to Ra, the sun god. The cobra in the middle is kind of broad-chested cobra with its head looking to the left, is wearing a tall crown signifying his kingship over the southern kingdom of Egypt. This is a picture of a sacred cobra shown at about 1 o'clock crowned with a sun disk. Here it's slightly covered with blue, and above his head is a sun disk. Amun is seated inside a mountain with the crowned cobra outside, and Amun also has a round sun disk on his head. This is another royal portrait of an Egyptian pharaoh, this time Senofru. He is shown seated on his throne with the basket in front of him, up a little bit higher, about 2 o'clock. On top of the basket is a coiled serpent, showing that Senofru was in the presence of the serpent of wisdom. This is a picture of a building called Snake Temple in Vietnam. Notice the 2 snakes on either side of the walkway into the temple area. So building temples with snakes around them or in them is not confined to just one part of the world. It is not a local practice. It is worldwide, and we will continue our discussion of the snake and religious worship worldwide in the next session.